Good evening, everybody. My name is Mark Dunley, and I am with the EcoAction Committee of the Green Party of the United States. And I want to thank you all for joining our forum this evening on the perils of garbage incineration. We'll talk both about the problems with garbage incineration, but also discuss some of the strategies that people can take in order to try to particularly shut down. There are about 70 garbage incinerators right now in the United States. Um, I think 80% of them are involved or located in environmental justice communities, communities with a high percentage of people, not only low income, but people of color. Um, Incineration, as we all know, creates and releases harmful chemicals and pollutants, air pollutants such as particulate matter. They can cause lung and heart diseases. Our speakers will certainly go over more details about this. They also release heavy metals such as lead and mercury, toxic chemicals such as PFAS and dioxin. In addition, one of the things I first got involved with garbage incineration back in 1985, and I helped write one of the first reports exposing the financial and environmental dangers of garbage incineration at a time when virtually every environmental group in the United States was promoting garbage incineration, turning gold to trash, and basically took a report from the California Air Resources Board and translated it into English and explained to people why um, garbage incineration was not a good idea. And on the financial matter, besides being very expensive, they often had financial penalties if your community decided not to continue to feed the garbage incinerator, but in fact to try to put together um, recycling and compost efforts, you actually end up with a financial penalty. And I was involved in the early 80s, early 90s in Albany, New York, where I live in the Capital District, and we shut down the Albany Ansys incinerator, which was a state-owned garbage incinerator that was being used to provide heat and power to the state capitol. We did shut the incinerator down. Unfortunately, they still end up burning gas, and so 30 years later, I'm involved in a present campaign to um, try to shut the facility down finally and convert the state capitol and related buildings to 100% renewable energy. And then I'm also involved in a fight to shut down a hazardous waste incinerator about 10 miles north of Albany in a little city called Cohoes. We did receive some national attention earlier, a couple of years ago, because we were able to expose that the Pentagon was sending the one of the forever chemicals, AFFF, part of the PFAS family, to this incinerator illegally and secretly, and we're able to shut that particular chemical from not being burnt there, but still have problems. And of course, it's across the street, back across the railroad tracks. Um, and if people can remain mute, that is good, so we don't get background noise. So let me turn it over to our speakers. We'll have three speakers. Mike Ewall, who's been with us before in some of our forums, is director of the Energy Justice Network, which is a national support network for groups fighting various dirty energy and waste energy facilities. Crystal Dialankar, who is with an organizer with the Minnesota Environmental Justice Table, and she is that group is leading the fight to shut down some of the Minnesota trash incinerators. And we're going to finish the initial presentations with Dave Mulinix, who is now with the Hawaii Green Party, but has previously been involved or continues to be involved, I believe, with the Hawaii Climate and Environmental Coalition, which is working to shut down one of the incinerators there. So each of the presenters will go for about 10 minutes. After all three of them is speaking, we will then turn it over to you all to ask questions. We'll probably go to about a little after 9 o'clock or so. So, Michael, welcome to EcoAction. And what do you have to tell us about garbage incineration?
Thank you, Mark. So I am going to share my screen and tell you a bunch of things about it. Let's get this fired up. All right, can you see that?
Now we can.
Now you can. Cool. Okay. Get these other windows out of my way. All right. So, hi everyone. Mike Ewall. I'm the founder of both Energy Justice Network and also a new project that we're launching called Beyond Burning, and have been working for over 30 years now, helping communities around the country fight off dirty energy and waste facilities of a wide range of types, but largely focusing on combustion of anything from trash to trees to any other kind of biomass or waste materials. Now, this here is a map of the existing trash incinerators in the country. Actually, I apologize. I need to update this and take Detroit is still on there for some reason. But there should be 66 left on this map. There were 2 more that closed down just this year, and 50 in total that closed down since 2020. Sorry, since 2000. 50 that closed since the turn of the century. So we're on a good glide path toward ending this industry, which looks a little like this. There were close to 200 at the peak around 1991, and now more and more keep closing every year with our help, and not always with our help. Sometimes they burn down or fall apart on their own. But it's my goal to take out the rest of this industry within the next decade if we can, so we can move on and destroy some other industries while we're doing good things for the world. And I think that's a reasonable time frame, because most of them are going to shut down that time frame anyways. They're getting kind of old, because they've not managed to build a new one at a new site in this country since 1995. And that one, we're well on our way to getting close early. So largely they've been trying to expand a few here or there, rebuild some, but they cannot build a new one at a new site without ferocious resistance. Despite hundreds of attempts, we've, as a movement, stopped them every time since 1995. Now, you may have seen this hierarchy before. This is EPA's idea of what their waste hierarchy is. And they call incineration energy recovery, which we take issue with that term, but they consider disposal to be landfilling, as if incineration is not also a form of disposal. And you'll notice if you visit their website anytime since July of last year, there's a disclaimer under that hierarchy, which you won't usually find carried forward when state and local governments keep copying this hierarchy, but they're revisiting it because we asked them to. And they admitted to us 1.5 years ago that they have 0 citations to back up the placement of incineration above landfilling in this hierarchy. And they are in the course of reviewing that and possibly revisiting this. Now, we would like them to adopt what we call zero waste. This is defined internationally and is peer reviewed internationally by the Zero Waste International Alliance. I'm part of that committee on that, and we made sure that the definition is very clear that zero waste is without burning. There is no such thing as zero waste with incineration, although there are a number of governments, car companies, cities, and others that try to say zero waste to landfill is a thing, as if they're not simply landfilling ash when they end up burning what's left anyway. This here is the zero waste hierarchy. This is something I developed that's now also used as an international standard through the Zero Waste International Alliance. And you'll see that incineration is considered unacceptable on here at the very bottom, and that the backstop is landfilling in the orange. If you do it correctly and do all the upstream things, you have a very small and stable residual left to be landfilled. Now, 1.5 years ago, or no, not a year, about a year ago, we had 274 groups sign on to a letter that we drafted to the Council on Environmental Quality under the White House to urge EPA to really revisit a long list of different policies they have that promote incineration. And this here is just an overview of what the things we were asking them to do. I don't have time to dive into all of that. But there are a lot of things that they're doing that are very biased, and we would like to see that revisited. And we got some news coverage on that. But let's get into incineration versus other sources of energy and waste disposal. So they like to say they're energy facilities. They call themselves power plants a lot of the time. And yet when you compare them to other power plants, like those that burn coal, with EPA data, you'll find that for most pollutants, they're dirtier than burning coal per unit of energy. So if they're the same size power plant, so to speak. So they don't like this comparison. And if you don't trust my number crunching, you can trust the state government of New York, which found the same thing when they compared the 8 coal plants that they have in the state versus the 10 trash incinerators that are still operating, but while all 8 coal plants are now shut down. This comparison was done in 2011 using the same methodology that we use with newer data from EPA. And you can see even for global warming emissions for CO2, they're 65% worse than coal per unit of energy, though that doesn't stop the industry from arguing that they're a climate solution with some very creative math. Now, the real question, though, is how does it compare to other methods of waste disposal? And when you're talking about incineration, it's not that versus landfills. It's landfills versus both, because you still have to landfill the toxic ash. For every 100 tons you burn, you get about 30 tons of toxic ash that have to go somewhere. Now, in Delaware County, Pennsylvania, which is one of the 5 incinerators surrounding where I live in Philadelphia, they have the largest incinerator in the country in a poor community of color. And on that point, actually, Mark, not to correct you, but you mentioned a statistic that's out there that's a little bit misleading that says that 80% of trash incinerators are in environmental justice communities. That report is pretty exaggerated. The actual data shows that 2/3 are majority white communities. But if you look at the largest of them, or adjust for the population around them, there is a very intense racial discrimination trend in the industry, especially for Black residents in this country. But you have to look at the size of them or the population around them and adjust for that to find that trend. So the biggest one, though, is the one in Chester, Pennsylvania, which is in Delaware County. And they did a zero waste plan that we got them to do for the state rather than a normal, here's a place we can send our trash plan. It's a zero waste plan. And that plan includes a life cycle analysis that compares incineration to landfilling. And when they did that, they found that, well, the consultants they hired, Jeffrey Morris, who runs Sound Resource Management Group, he has the best life cycle assessment on this topic. And they found that incineration is far worse than landfilling. In blue, for the climate, you'll see it's a lot worse. But even if it weren't, the other things add up to be pretty bad as well. Like the brown is representing the particulate matter that is causing heart attacks and strokes, or the red, which are the toxic chemicals released, causing birth defects and cancers, or the yellow, which is the nitrogen oxides triggering asthma attacks. You add these all up and you see a lot more of a health and environmental impact than you get from going straight to a landfill. And the transportation component is often used to justify using incineration close to home instead of trucking it further. And what this and other studies have found, this is actually from a different study in Maryland, but the Delaware County study found the same thing, that transportation is a very small fraction. You cannot justify incinerating close to home because these big dirty diesel trucks have to travel sometimes hundreds of miles to get to a landfill, because there's no distance at which you can reasonably go where the trucking emissions are going to overcome the difference between incineration in red and landfilling in yellow. The transportation is the blue, which is trucking, or the black for rail. On top of that is a very small fraction of the system. Oops. Okay. So there's something I call the smokestack story that is used in all communities with incinerators or other smokestacks. And I want to debunk it a little bit. So basically that story starts with saying, well, don't worry, we have continuous monitors on our stack and we'll know what comes out at all times. And the state is a rigorous enforcer, so they'll trust us. They'll be very tough and give us big fines if they find us in violation. And the emissions limits that they insist they're staying within mean that it's healthy and safe. Now, every part of that is misleading intentionally, and I'll walk you through that for a minute. First, they're not always within their permit limits, and fines sometimes are zero or can be negotiated down, but they're not enough to change behavior. So you see companies continue to be in violation from year after year. They also can't meet modern limits, at least for nitrogen oxides, except for one incinerator in Florida that was built under modern standards. None of the other ones would be able to be legally operating this day if they were permitted anytime in the past decade. The permitting is not based on health and safety. They're technology-based standards. And one of the reasons we know that it's not health-based is that the permit limits are concentration-based, it's parts per million, or other measures that are per how much is coming out. So if you have a 500 ton per day incinerator, it will be allowed to put out a certain amount of pollution. But if you have a 3,000 ton per day incinerator, it gets to be 6 times dirtier just because it's bigger, which is not something you would think if there's a certain amount of pollution that's acceptable for the community and thou shalt not go over that limit. Now, we also know companies have rigged their testing, so it's not always honest, and that there's no safe dose of a lot of the pollutants that come out of them. So it doesn't matter what the amount is. If it's under a limit, it can still be dangerous. But the main
Mike,
thing,
I'm
yeah,
just going to note it's been about 9 minutes so far.
no timing, I'm going to go a little bit over, but we'll be almost over.
Okay.
So there are only three pollutants that are monitored continuously. And the point here is that for most pollutants at incinerators, they don't know what's coming out day to day. They test once a year under best operating conditions. And I liken this to if we regulated motorists the same way we regulate smokestacks in this country, we would let people drive around all year with no speedometer. And once a year, you would have a speed trap set on the highway with warning signs saying, warning, slow down, speed trap ahead. And the brother of the driver would be running the speed trap because the companies hire their own consultants and choose who they pay to do the testing. We now have the technology, though, to continuously test for over 50 different pollutants. And we know from certain examples that the actual emissions, when they use that kind of testing, are shown to be far higher than they are when they just test once a year under best behavior. And so one of our victories we've had was just this past year, we got Oregon to pass a law that says they have to continuously monitor for dioxins, PCBs, and toxic metals. Just like this slide shows for in Hawaii, for the third biggest incinerator in the country, that colorful column, the green ones are what they have to continuously monitor. The yellow once a year, red not at all. And we're trying to get a bill passed to make it the green column so that they have to really show us what's coming out for all these pollutants. I'm going to skip the one on the ash, and let's just get to the part about how to win, how to lose real quick. Because I know that's one of the things you wanted me to talk about is just how to stop these things. So the first point is to understand how to win. It's important to understand how not to win, what to avoid doing. And oftentimes groups will get into things and think, well, this is very complicated. The system is telling me to go to this hearing and speak up and about a permit. And if we don't get what we want, then we have to hire lawyers and get them involved and appeal permits. It gets very expert heavy, very technical, very quickly. And that's a good way of losing because the bottom will drop out of your group. And then you'll lose your ability to fundraise and pay your experts anyway. And this assumption that somehow lawyers fire silver bullets and can stop anything is a little bit off base because oftentimes what we're fighting is legal, even though it's wrong. And so going expert heavy and fighting money power with money power oftentimes doesn't win. But if you fight money power with people power, you can win. And usually we try to do that by focusing at the local government level and figuring out what can the local government do to beat this if we were in charge. And whether you can convince them to do the right thing or take them over or use initiative and referendum processes, there are ways that we've beaten a lot of companies by taking over local governments or getting local laws passed to defeat them that way. So I'll leave it there. Thanks so much, and looking forward to other speakers in Q&A.
Thank you, Michael. And I will note that this webinar particularly was requested by one of our members from Minnesota, Rachel Bratton, and she had reached out to the Minnesota Environmental Justice Table, and Crystal D'Alencar is going to talk about some of the work that they are doing there. And Crystal, you need to take yourself off of mute.
Hey everybody, thank you so much for the invitation and for the opportunity to speak a little bit about our campaign. As mentioned, I'm an organizer with the Minnesota Environmental Justice Table. It's a grassroots organization that works heavily on local environmental justice issues. Right now, our main campaigns are the HERC incinerator. HERC stands for Hennepin Energy Recovery Center. Hennepin County is the county that Minneapolis exists in, and it is the HERC, the incinerator, takes care of most of Minneapolis's trash. Most of Hennepin County's trash. About 40% comes from the city, and so so our fight is to shut down the incinerator. It's been in existence for about over 30 years. And they have not wanted it since the reason it actually got put into place was because over 30 years ago, they wanted to put in a waste processing facility in the more affluent suburbs of Hennepin County, and they filed a lawsuit and rejected that. And so they instead created this incinerator on the north side of Minneapolis, which is primarily low income and primarily Black and brown folks. And so they, at that time, also a lot of that community certainly did not want an incinerator in their backyard, but unfortunately they did not have the power or money the ways that the suburbs did to fight getting that placed there. So it indeed was then constructed in that area. This was also during a time in the 80s when, during a time too, while there was a lot of environmental justice issues already happening. There existed a shingles factory there, a major highway, the most major highway really in the Twin Cities, 94, had been built 20 years prior that really barged through the Black communities and displaced tens of thousands of homes and low-income communities. So this was a major environmental justice issue, environmental justice area that the incinerator was placed in. Luckily, Mike, being the expert, went through a lot of the issues as far as the emissions that are produced from incinerators. Well, the HERC is no different. The incinerator also exists within a mile of 18 elementary schools. And further, it's right next to the zip code with the highest asthma hospitalization rate in the entire state of Minnesota. And then that same zip code is the second and third highest asthma rates. Only second and third to the first zip code with the highest asthma rate, which is an area called East Phillips, which is very similar to the north side of Minneapolis, low income, mostly Black and brown, and also gets the wind patterns, some of the worst emissions from the HERC incinerator during the summer. So these are both essentially sacrifice zones and the most impacted areas of the entire Hennepin County is what the HERC impacts. And so our organization worked within the past 5 years, really kind of materializing out of fights that have already been going on around the incinerator. Luckily, as everyone here I'm sure knows, obviously the climate crisis, the environmental issues have been around for eons, but really in the past couple decades, due to the fact that we're at such a crisis, in a different way, experiencing it to such a degree, a lot of local environmental justice issues are getting more spotlight than they ever have, and that's no different than I think the incinerator in Minneapolis. And so they tried to expand this incinerator actually just about a decade ago. It currently burns about 1,000 tons of trash every year. Every day, 1,000 tons of trash every day, and they tried to expand it to 1,200 tons of trash every day. And luckily the community, including our Attorney General, Keith Ellison, fought to prevent that, and they won. And so this was really mobilized the efforts to actually get it shut down completely. And so currently we're at a time where we're at a period where, because of very much to what Mike was just talking about as far as the efforts, right? Because for so many years, it really does become with a lot of industry, a sort of war of experts, right? You can't depend or rely on either, for that muscle to be the one flex that will win your fights, especially with environmental justice issues. We see very much how much industry pours money into their own experts, and then government enables that because, a lot of the times it's a hand-holding entity between government and industry. And so these wins that have been happening, and particular to our fight as well, has really come from the people power and the ground efforts. And, that came through having allies in the legislature, allies in the commissioners, allies in city council, people who really were fighting and champions of the neighborhoods that are impacted. And environmental justice zones. And so our fight currently is at a really incredible point. It is not, we have not quite won. We will consider it, I think, a true win when those stacks are down. But just in the past month, our commissioners passed a resolution to get the incinerator shut down earliest 2028. The range is obviously quite ridiculous, between 2028 and 2040. And so, you know, obviously the campaign is not over. We are making sure and pressuring the legislature to pressure and push the county to create a shutdown and transition plan, which we've worked with experts, Zero Waste USA and other experts, to create a transition plan to show you can get this thing shut down in 2 years, get better jobs for those workers, have a better infrastructure for waste. And so we're at a really exciting point in the campaign, where, yes, on paper, we have something saying, and for the first time in the history of this incinerator, over 30 years, the county has admitted is a false solution to trash, which, for folks who are familiar with incineration, that is almost never the case. Obviously, all the propaganda around incineration is that it is a green solution to landfills, especially the waste to energy facilities. Again, it's just so much propaganda around them. And so just to get them admit and say, you know, on record that they are not a solution to trash was a big deal. Never mind on paper saying that they are aiming to shut it down. And so right now it's really in that point of doing the hard work of creating that infrastructure, which is dealing with the waste crisis. And we, you know, this isn't just about shutting down incinerators here in Minneapolis and St. Paul or the state of Minnesota. The idea is we're trying to, they're acting as crutches to the waste crisis, right? It's allowing the government to just say, look at this, you know, state-of-the-art technology that can take your garbage and turn it into electricity and heat, which is obviously, you know, as Mike kind of spoke to, false. That is not how, you know, physics, chemistry works, first of all. And second of all, they still use landfills. They're not a solution. We have to really deal with the root of the problem, which is hyperconsumption. And which, right, hyperproduction, hyper extraction. That is why we're dealing with the climate crisis, is kind of where we are as a society in that culture. And so, yeah, so our fight is really exciting. And we're hoping to get into the belly of the beast around the waste issue at the moment, and keep building on this win, and get into the infrastructure and get those stacks down. So oh, I should also speak to, yeah, the idea is certainly that, you know, once this incinerator is down, the transition plan is in place to create more comprehensive infrastructure of reuse and reduction, versus just recycling and composting, right? I think a lot of folks are always thinking that those are kind of the savior acts and tools to really get us away from having to use landfills and incineration. And, you know, they are a tool, but that's not really dealing with why we have all this waste to begin with. And so we're also trying to build, you know, really navigate and explain and express that landfills are not a solution either, but there is environmental justice criteria that landfills can meet, that incineration cannot, right? And so we're trying to tackle that issue too, and work with communities who live around landfills to try to expand and invest in making these landfills to be as safe as they can be, until we are actually getting at, you know, 75, 80, 90% waste diversion, so that landfills aren't of use anymore either. So this is all part of our plan as well.
Well, thank you very much, Crystal. You know, one thing I'm just going to comment as, and Dave, if you can turn on your video, that would be helpful. One thing I'll mention, based on some of the comments in the chat room, that, you know, remember the hierarchy of solid waste is, you know, reduce, reuse, recycle, and the big fight has always been they do virtually nothing about reduce and very little about reuse and recycle. And so we had a previous webinar, which I'll send a post to, about different ways that states and local governments can begin to actually reduce the amount of trash, the amount of waste being generated. But at this point, I'm going to turn it over to our final speaker, Dave Mullenix from Hawaii. And I will just give a little shout out to Rachel, since she's the person that asked to put together this webinar. When Dave's finished, if you want to be the person that first asks the question, I'll give you that opportunity. But Dave, take it away.
Thank you so much, Mark and Crystal and Mike. Mike is an unsung hero, we know him, but more people should know what he's doing. His work is just amazing. I just want to thank you all for having this presentation today. Here in Hawaii, we have an H Power plant. We call it H Power. It's the Campbell Industrial Park in Kapolei. It's on the west end of Oahu. It's the third largest waste incinerator plant in the nation. It's capable of burning up to 3,000 tons of waste per day. It's also one of the largest industrial air polluters in our state, according to our Department of Health. 2 of the 3 burners at H Power are missing 2 of the 4 pollutant control systems commonly used in trash incinerators. So it's not clean in any way, shape, or form. And of these carbon injection systems that transfer highly toxic dioxins and furans and mercury from the air to the ash. On Oahu, 10% of energy comes from waste to energy. While waste to energy does reduce trash, it also emits various pollutants into the air that are harmful to our health. And this is really important for folks to understand. And Mike goes over that very well, that if you bury something, it's in one location. Once you burn it, it's all over the place and you cannot control where it's going. Our Oahu Waste Energy Agreement is really unfair and harmful to us. In Honolulu, if we don't produce enough trash for H Power, the city needs to pay a fine. And from 2013 to 2016, Honolulu paid H Power $6.2 million in fines. That's a big, they can't really claim it's cheap or economic. Currently, they're also burning not only trash, but biomass, trees, etc. And here in Hawaii, that's qualified under our state law as renewable energy. And so HECO counts on that. That's the company that is using this H Power plant. And they're counting that trash incineration on Oahu as renewable energy, which is something we've been trying to get rid of. Waste Management Oahu has been working to establish an ash to recycling facility that would process the toxic ash from our H Power trash incinerator. So we want to build another facility, right? And adjacent to the current incinerator. This facility would take H Power ash, extract some metals, and recycle that to build roads, etc. So this also is toxic system. And to add insult to injury, they plan to send the trash from Hawaii Island over here to Oahu, burn that in the H Power plant, and then send the ash back to Hawaii. So all through this process, you're getting pollutants into the atmosphere. The trucks and the ships and all that, they're dumping this ash. It's very lightweight and can be easily stirred up. So we have had some success. Last year, we did kill SB 1247 to require Hawaii State Energy Office to enter into a public-private partnership to develop a second waste-to-energy incineration facility to reduce solid waste stream here on Oahu. So yay, we did that. This session, we're put forward a bill to force H Power to report on contaminants that they are currently emitting. I'd just like to talk for a second about what I call bait and switch. All these, the fossil fuel industry and all these guys, they're bait and switch. They're trying to come up with ways to keep doing what they're doing. So waste to energy, nuclear power, natural gas, clean coal, hydrogen, as well as carbon pricing, carbon fee and dividend, carbon cashback, carbon trading, carbon offsets, all these are schemes cooked up by the industry, so they continue to pollute. And they are a problem because other environmental groups get excited about these ideas, and they want to. It's like, hey, this is a way to to fix this whole thing. We'll just do a tax on the polluters, but it has never worked. It will never work because polluters don't pay taxes. So as our friend Mike Ewall noted, by punishing the fossil fuels A carbon tax put biomass and waste incineration, nuclear power, landfill, and all those other things, and an advantage. So by having like a carbon tax or carbon via dividend or carbon cashback, you're actually helping get these waste incineration plants built. And I think that's a really big, important thing. I just like quickly just share a couple of personal stories here. When we were doing our testimony and when people were talking about this waste incineration plants, one of the guys that came to testify, he just moved to Hawaii, and not sure how long, but within a few months. And he was so excited to be in this clean environment. It's like, oh, I'm going to be in one of the most pristine places in the world. He's very excited about this. And so but then he'd get up in the morning and his truck was covered in all this black soot. And you go, what the heck? And everything was covered. And his window screens, his soot all over in the house. What is this? And it turns out it was from the Beach Power Plant. And it's just polluting this whole area. The other thing that we learned is that this is a heavy kind of a smoke or heavy kind of ash. So it kind of lays low to the ground. So it's about 3 feet up. And I don't know, how tall children are, but where the wind blows, that's right where the bus stops are for our kids here locally. And so they are breathing in this toxic ash and smoke. They don't see it because it's, it looks pretty clean in the atmosphere, but it isn't. And so those are some of the things to think about. I think when you're going to try to shut down your local plant, getting those personal stories out there are really important because they do make a huge difference to humanize what we're talking about. It isn't just, some environmental group that's just like going crazy about, they want to do something to make the world a better place. This affects everyday people, and everyone should be an environmentalist at this point. So how to fight incineration projects. And there are 3 most important things to remember about fighting waste incineration. Organize, organize, organize. And you can put that in any order you like. The first thing to do is you got to educate the public. People don't really understand. They think, oh, waste energy, this is brilliant. We're going to be clean energy, blah, blah, blah. And you need to build a movement. Get as many organizations as you can get involved. And it doesn't, the more diverse the groups you can get involved, the better. Because once again, if you're just a bunch of environmental groups, I love environment, and that's where I'm from. But to have groups who aren't involved in the clean energy movement really helps build your case and helps get the politicians to listen to you. Pay attention to your legislature. Legislatures are sneaking bills through all the time. And if you're not paying attention to what they're doing, in fact, they've done that to us here locally, and I'm not going into those right now, but they'll sneak these bills through, and all of a sudden you're like, where did that come from? And they are very good at being sneaky. So you got to really watch what your legislators are doing. You also educate politicians. Go meet with them, get to know them, even if they're your enemy. The more you can talk to them and try to make a personal relationship with them, you'll be surprised. Some might actually turn around and some might actually get what you're talking about, but you need to build a support network within your legislature, and finding as many legislators as you can who are going to be supportive is really important. It's going to strengthen what you're trying to do. Get bills written to support your opposition to waste energy. Testify on those bills. Get anybody you can to testify. Build your email list of folks who are going to help you get those testimonies out there. Write op-eds, letters to the editor. Organize your speaker presentations. One of the most brilliant speakers on this is Mike Ewall, and I don't know when he sleeps. He works so hard. And then just basic things like sign waving. You're made people like sign waving such a waste of time. It really isn't, because sign waving gets people involved who wouldn't normally get involved. It's really simple. Anyone can get involved. We've had people jump off the bus and sign wave with us, or on their way to get on the bus, they'll stop and sign wave with us. So it's a simple thing that people can do easily. And they doesn't take a whole lot of energy for them, but you also get a few more people on your email list who are going to help testify for you. So I want to keep this really short. I think the questions and answers. Oh, I just ran out of time anyway. Thank you so much. This is a great presentation. I appreciate being here today.
Okay, Dave, I want you to stay there. Don't go away. And I'd also like Crystal, if she would turn on her video so we can put her onto the central screen. As I noted, I wrote a report back in 1985 about garbage incineration, and kind of was an expert in the 80s and 90s. That's 30 years old. so I'm no longer the expert that I was. But one of the things, and I'm sure Mike and others have pointed out, but just to sort of highlight it, part of the problem is that when you burn things, chemistry 101, you create new things. And that particularly one of the things that garbage incinerators do, it creates dioxin, particularly because they often burn paper and plastic together because there's high, BTU, and so incinerators are often, a major source of dioxin, which was what, was the active chemical in Agent Orange, and it's also, as others have pointed out, major sources of so many heavy metals and other contaminants. But at this point, it's about 8:45. We want to open it up to questions. If people can place the questions into the chat room. But I'm going to give Rachel, if she wants, the ability to ask the first question. And I'm going to unmute. Rachel, you can unmute yourself if you want to ask a question.
So I wanted to first share the reason I suggested to have this meeting was because I went to one of the shut down the HERC events maybe a month and a half ago now, or 2 months ago. And I noticed something, a lot of the environmental groups that I'm a part of, the room is just filled with white people. And at this meeting, there was way more people at this meeting, and it was almost all people of color. And those are the voices that I've been wanting to amplify. And hearing them talk about, the grandchild or the nephew that has asthma in this part of town, it was really eye-opening for me. I actually didn't really realize that my trash was going to the HERC. This is just a side note. Ever since then, I've been trying to reduce my waste by thinking about what I'm purchasing. So the companies that aren't using packaging and making me bring my own jars are the companies that are making money off of me now. And everyone can do that. In Minneapolis, we have the Terre Market, which is a zero waste grocery store. And you bring your own jars and your own containers and whatnot, and you can buy almost everything you should need at this place. So I've shifted that way. Couple things I was hoping for this meeting was, number one, to celebrate the work that is being done right now, and to share, Crystal and Dave, like what you've been, and Mike, what you've been doing these days, like to further this. And then also, secondarily, for those who have been shutting down these incinerators for so many years and have had success, for those people to also share what works, so that we can be as effective as possible now.
So would anybody like to respond to the points that Rachel has raised or asked? And by anybody, I mean Mike, Dave, or Crystal.
I see another hand up, but yeah, let me just add one little piece. The idea that we can beat incinerators by doing enough zero waste, I want to discourage folks from thinking that they're connected in that direction, because I've seen a lot of communities make the mistake of thinking that we can zero waste ourselves out of this problem, especially if we're focusing on individual actions for zero waste, which is great. I do them all. I'm a very big zero waste person personally, but that doesn't stop my neighbors from putting out massive amounts of trash, or even some of my housemates. And we're not going to systemically beat this system one person at a time. So we need the public policies. We need to make it easy for everyone to make as little trash as I and some others here are doing a great job at, because we need to have the curbside composting collection and the places to recycle stuff and the ways of getting food without all the packaging and all the things, and make sure they're all accessible and affordable for everyone. So the systemic zero waste solutions are important, but don't get stuck in the trap of thinking that, oh, well, we'll fight this incinerator by reducing waste enough. You'll never do it quickly enough before the thing dies of old age. And meanwhile, more people are getting asthma, cancer, and all kinds of other health problems. So there needs to be a strategic focus on how do we take the incinerator down that's on a separate track from zero waste work. And oftentimes it's important to prioritize the anti-incinerator work over the zero waste work, because as one of the speakers pointed out, I think Crystal may have pointed this out, is the put or pay clauses in contracts put you in a situation where you have to pay them a certain amount of pay them a certain amount of money anyway, regardless of how much trash you give, because there's a minimum amount of waste that you owe them, or you pay them anyway in these contracts. Not everyone, but usually the bigger cities and the bigger contracts that they have. So if you're stuck with that, you can't do the right thing, because you have to pay to do the right thing and pay twice because you're paying the incinerator not to use them. So you need to get past these contracts so you can do the right thing.
David, Crystal, do you want to add anything?
Just to follow up on what Mike said, that, great. I mean, people can, do their personal thing, but we really have, we have to work together. We have to get as many people on board as possible. That's the only thing going to make change happen. And that's the only thing in the country that has ever made change happen. Everything that's ever happened positively in this country is because the people got together. We stopped the Vietnam War, we got civil rights passed. It was always a movement of people. And individually, we just can't do it on our own. So Mike is right on that.
I'm just going to note, this event is being recorded, and we'll also do a follow-up, both everybody who came here today with links to various materials, as well as everybody who pre-registered. And as I said before, Beyond Plastic, which is a group that my wife runs, did do a presentation about some of the efforts to reduce waste. And maybe 2-3 weeks ago, a woman who wrote a book basically was living a year without trash. And the basic answer was she found out it's impossible to do it. And I have a recording. I also do a radio show, so I'll send around that link. And and that's one of the reasons she got active with the Beyond Plastics movement, because there needs to be policies to make the producers of waste stop producing it. And there's a limit as to what we as consumers can do to eliminate that waste because of how our society and just the amount of time it was very interesting, how she tried to actually get, maybe you shouldn't eat meat, but trying to get meat without wrapping on it, all the different products and all the amount of waste was just sort of very eye-opening. So I'm trying to look at some of these other questions that are being posted. An electrostatic precipitator, is that required in all incinerators? More of a technical question. Mike is shaking his head no.
No, electrostatic precipitators are old technology for handling particulate matter. It's one of 4 control devices that most incinerators have, although some are missing control devices and only have 2. But most of them that have any particulate matter controls now use what's called a bag house or a fabric filter. That's like a bunch of big vacuum cleaner bags, hundreds of them, and it takes the fly ash. It collects the small particles, the fly ash. So there'll still be some that get into the air, but a lot of them will get caught and then mixed with the bottom ash and then dumped in a landfill, and you get exposed to it that way as well. It's very dangerous and hazardous, but they pretend it's not. But yeah, electrostatic precipitators are older technology and generally not recommended anymore.
I noticed somebody's posted a question: what is the best way to hire a certified zero waste consultant to move my county to zero waste? And I'll just note, 1985, when I was doing my work on garbage incineration, one of the real experts was Dr. Paul Connor up at St. Lawrence University, particularly an international expert on dioxin. But him and his wife and others did start a zero waste movement, and he's also one of the leaders in a group called Gaia, which I guess is an international movement fighting incineration across the planet. But is anybody, if somebody wanted to hire a zero waste consultant, what's the best way to proceed on that?
Yeah, I would say get in touch with me for language on it. I'm going to drop in a link to what we did that got the best consultants for this hired in Delaware County, Pennsylvania, with the example that I showed. But I have additional information I can share with you by email on how to just draft it the right way so you get the right people hired. Otherwise, they'll use the word zero waste and have the wrong people hired and perpetuate the status quo. And the folks in Westchester County, I helped get that group started, and they already have all that information. I shared it with them months ago.
Right. And I will just mention, as my wife runs beyond plastic, only about 5%, 6% of the plastic in this country is recycled, and there are technological reasons why you really can't recycle plastic that much. And now the big movement by the industry is promote, chemical recycling, which is another fancy name for incineration of plastic. And plastic is the new coal, as Mike pointed out. Well, with incinerators being worse than coal plants, but increasingly this plastic production, which the fossil fuel industry is moving in as we begin to shut down fossil fuel use, is heavily invested in plastic. Did anybody else have anything else response to that question? Okay, any other questions people want to present or comments from our speakers? A lot of anti-corporate stuff. I guess we can sort of generally agree with that.
I have a question to Mike. What's your your next thing you're working on? What's your your next movement here?
Oh, God. It's largely to spread things like the Oregon example that we're now bringing to Hawaii and hopefully soon other states, to try to get state level laws passed to require continuous emissions monitoring. But I've been doing this for a couple of decades at the local level, getting local governments to pass innovative local laws that go beyond the state and federal minimums, so we can hold companies accountable and even force existing ones closed and prevent new ones. This past week's election was really exciting because there are several local communities in New York and some other places where good people took over the local governments in places where toxic facilities are that have been fought. And that opens up the channel for me to then work with them and write the laws that these good people running the local government can now pass to prevent new incinerators or other noxious facilities or take down existing ones.
I just follow up on that. Is that's the problem. They hide the toxins and stuff that they're emitting. They don't test for them. If they don't test for them, then they don't exist. And so if they don't exist, then if you get sick, then it can't be that, because we never found that to be the case. Well, you never tested for it. So the bill that we're going to be working on, I think, with Mike, is to just that. What pollutants are you guys putting out there? And there are thousands of chemicals and stuff, and they're going into this incinerator. We don't even know all the different kinds of chemical compounds and new compounds, and that are going just out into the atmosphere in general, or just into our community in general through the products. But then you burn these things, and that just intensifies the problem. So I really appreciate what Mike's doing there. And there's another thing to focus on. I think it's one way maybe to help close these things down is for people just to see, here's the fact: you're getting arsenic and whatever, and these whole horrible pollutants, you're breathing them in. You're seeing them on top of your car, and they're very dangerous. They're cancer causing, and it's at this level, and it's too high, and the state government's not doing anything about it, and we need to do something about it. So it's a good tool to help close these things down, or at least put some pressure on them.
One thing I'll mention, I'm from New York State. Mike's done some work in New York State, quite a bit of work. And our DEC loves incineration. And they love the idea that if you burn things at 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit, it magically makes things disappear, even though the evidence shows, completely opposite. And so one of the problems we've been finding is that other incinerators or kilns that burn at very high temperatures, like cement plants, are increasingly looking at burning garbage as a way to bring in revenue. And Mike was involved in a fight down at the Port of Queens, stopping burning tires, burning stuff, and helped pass a local law. You may not know this yet because they're still counting the votes, but apparently the town supervisor who was elected to the town of Queens has lost his election. And tomorrow, he's behind by 25 votes, so they're going to wait for all the absentee ballots to come in, but it looks like there's a good chance that he's lost. We're seeming to be getting more questions. Somebody had anything we can do about and then the existing energy to waste contracts the local governments enter into?
I think I answered that by just saying to stop them in the first place. There shouldn't be any contracts anywhere for burning waste anywhere. So there are a lot of tactics you can bring to preventing them from being passed in the first place. But really just get in touch with me for more specific details because it depends on the local situation.
And I'm going to actually respond to something that Crystal posted, TerraCycle. But this woman who'd spent a year trying to get rid of all her garbage, go to zero waste, was so frustrated that she eventually said, "Okay, I'm going to send my stuff to TerraCycle." And it's unfortunately, as she investigated it, it's greenwashing. It's propaganda to take your money, and stuff was being shipped overseas and often ended up in incinerators and stuff like that. But I'll post the interview so you can read all of her stuff. Let's take it down. We're getting time.
Can we have Melody Adujas from my co-conspirator here in Hawaii, and she has her hand raised, so you might want to hear from her. Hi, Melody.
Oh, people raising. I have been looking at the chat. So Melody, you have a question you wanted to ask? And then I see Tracy has a question. So let's see, Melanie, we'll unmute you.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, I have a question for Mike. I mean, that's one issue that we've been kind of dealing with that's coming up, where the city and county of Honolulu is considering using ash, incinerator ash, as asphalt on the roads. Do you know of any other states or counties that do that kind of practice? That's one thing. And then the other question that I have, again with the ash, we are using, not we, but the county is using ash as landfill cover. Now, do other states and counties do such reckless behavior like that? Thank you.
Yes, my home county outside of Philadelphia, where I grew up, is one of the places where they are doing this ash recycling concept. And there are other places they've been kicked out of Tennessee, out of Maine, out of York, Pennsylvania. But they've gotten in there. They've gotten in Spokane, Washington. They've gotten in a few other places. I haven't been able to focus on fighting that because the community group burned itself out fighting a hazardous waste facility and stopping that instead. So that place has just got a lot of stuff. But your island is looking to my home county as an example and have cited that when they spoke with me. They said 60% of the ash they get, they can then reuse and make into roads and stuff, which is just a terrible idea because roads will erode and small particles of toxic material will get everywhere. And it's like having a linear unlined landfill that is just totally deregulated. Workers and the communities are going to get exposed to it. But the ashes landfill cover, that's also very common. I think that actually started in Pennsylvania too, in that we started deregulating landfill cover material and letting them use, instead of soil on the top of the landfill every day to protect the community from things blowing into them, they started figuring out they can save money not buying soil and make money taking waste. So now they use ash, construction, demolition waste, and all sorts of other waste materials as alternative daily cover material. And ash is the dumbest thing you can possibly use for that because it's fine particles that can blow into the community and cause a lot of harm.
I had mentioned earlier that I'm involved in fighting this hazardous waste incinerator in Cohoes, New York. what it was a shale operation 30, 40 years ago, running a kiln at 3,000 degrees to burn the shale to turn it into aggregate. And they realized they could um, reduce their gas costs and make money by starting to burn hazardous waste. And there was something under federal law called the Bevel Amendment, which said that toxic gas that was collected from air pollution equipment um, did not have to be treated as hazardous ash if it was from a mining operation, and I believe also from a coal operation, and a few other things, cement. Um, Part of that amendment was changed 3 years ago, so they can no longer do that. And yet, our wonderful State Department of Environmental Conservation, DEC, has refused to make the company comply with the law. We're in the process of suing, and actually next Monday, they are holding a hearing about finally getting the company to comply with this now 3-year-old change in the law, because the state controller came in and did an audit, and DEC claimed that they required people, many people who run these facilities operate under what's called expired permits. But DEC insisted that they were making companies under the expired permits comply with new regulations, and they clearly were not, and now Norlight is one of them. Tracy, you had a question. Let me see.
Well, I just want to actually,
Or comment.
yeah. And first I want to thank you for mentioning TerraCycle. That was one of the things I was going to talk about. Number two, I just want to mention beneficial use determinations, where you take a waste product, often a hazardous waste, including fracking waste, and you find a use for it. And under EPA and the state environmental agency, they rule whether it's a beneficial use. It's called a beneficial use determination. And then magically, a hazardous waste can be treated not like a waste, but as a, something beneficial. And this is how we get plastics in our roads, we get incinerator ash, we get all these things. So that's just a tip for people to look at when you're faced with one of these horrific situations. I was not able to read the chat carefully, but someone was asking about whether job opportunities for low-income people. And I just wanted to point out that the MRF stands for Material Recovery Facility, where recyclables are sorted. All around the country, there's an employment agency, the same employment agency, I forget the name of it, which usually has an office at these MRFs, these sorting facilities, and they pay people below livable wage, and they are the employer rather than the company. And this is a big racket nationally. One of these workers was killed in the MRF in Albany several years ago. So yeah, there's some really bad employment opportunities. These are the people that stand there for 8 or 10 hours, sorting things really quickly, with no guides on the conveyor belts, and that's how this poor man died. He was caught with a piece of plastic and pulled into a conveyor belt and was dead. So yeah, those are not the kinds of jobs we need. The newer technology is to collect, and I don't think there are any of these trucks in the US, but in Ireland, they're making electric trucks, electric recycling collection vehicles with 10 compartments, including one for food waste. They have 2 people in the crew who pick up the materials, put them in the compartments. There's no sorting required. The materials are far less contaminated, far less trucking costs, and much more material recovery. So we've got to change the way we do things. Thank you.
Okay. So we're about out of time. So I'm going to give each of our speakers any closing remarks you want to make, any final points. We'll go in reverse order. We'll start with Dave. So Dave, Crystal, and then Mike. About 2 minutes each.
Right. I'm going back to those 3 main points I suggested that you remember: organize, organize, organize. Fight, fight, fight. you know, the only way you're going to win is to fight these bastards. And sorry about my language, but they are. So fight, fight, fight. Get in there, organize, and get people involved. Thank you so much. Thank you for this event. And thank you, Mike and Crystal. You guys are great.
Crystal.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I very fully 100% agree with Dave. Definitely organizing. I door knocked over 2,000 doors of the past 2 years. And it really was getting that people power. You know, and yeah, education. And really it's, you know, going to come down also to a culture shift, like Mike said, and a lot of people echoed. Individualized zero waste initiatives are great, you know, everyone do your best. But it's a systemic problem. And so we really have to tackle the system and the powers that be. So that can only happen with numbers. So yeah, definitely have to echo the organizing component. So thank you all very much, and Dave and Mike and yeah, everyone, Rachel, for inviting me. So thank you all.
Awesome, great segue. So since we're talking about good organizing, that happens if we're in touch with each other. So I'm going to drop my info in one more time in the chat and hope you all copy it. But please, if you're living near an incinerator or just want to get involved in this issue somehow, drop me your information. Let me know where you are. You can just put a zip code in your contact info. The most important thing is that we're in touch with each other. And I think if you just tell me wherever you are, either I already know stuff about it, or I can easily look up and get you information about it. And I can talk to you and have a short conversation that easily figures out what are the best strategies to move forward, what do we need to figure out, and can put you on the path to like researching the right things and having good ways to make some progress.
And I just ended up one of our more recent stories fighting this hazardous waste incinerator. We had a scientist who took the state's cancer data for our capital district, and he plotted out places where there were excess cancer rates. And there are three main sites in our area. One, the Norlite hazardous waste incinerator. Two, the old Answers garbage incinerator. And three, the Ravenna cement plant. What a surprise. And the Department of Health responded just to Norlite, because we're the ones that are making the most noise at the moment, and said, of course, as they always do, that it's clear that the real reason is that people around Norlite smoke too many cigarettes. Usually they also will say that they drink too much, but I guess they couldn't tie alcohol to respiratory cancer rates, so they pass on it. And they did admit that, yeah, you know, industrial pollution facilities could be causing problems, but you know, that's really complicated, so we can't really say anything about that. So it's just very frustrating to deal with. I want to thank all our speakers, Dave, Mike, and Crystal. If any of you have materials you would like us to send out to the larger group, please send this to us. We will be sending out a recording of this. EcoAction meets the second Monday of each month at 8 p.m. and we often do webinars like this. And we just want to thank everybody for taking the time to be with us here today. Bye-bye.
Aloha from Hawaii.